I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Dan Wetzel would have thrived in any era of sports journalism. His wit, curious mind, sharp reporting skills, and engaging style of writing make him especially effective today. Wetzel has bridged the gap from print to digital better than any writer as a national columnist for Yahoo Sports. Few are as versatile. He's a must-read and a must-listen, too, as a podcaster. Wetzel's got game, and he's a fun guy to spend time with anywhere. Trust me, I know. We got this round. Hey, Dan, welcome to Press Box Access. How in the hell are you?
I'm good, man. How you been?
I'm getting along. I used to type, now I talk.
I hear this is going to take like an hour, which is the longest conversation we've ever had without alcohol.
Well, I was just going to say, I think I'm going to have to check your ID, Mr. Wetzel. I think you might be too young to be in this tavern. I don't know if you've seen the guest list or not.
Yeah, it was a little humbling.
We serve oatmeal and we soak our feet about midway through the show. And so if you need to take a break, we can do that.
Take a nap.
But yeah, I do think that your birth certificate says that you're actually a little younger than me, but I know for a fact that
kindred spirits.
Yeah, well, you have quite a few miles on your tires, and I know that. I know that because I put a few of those miles on there with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I seem to recall a pizza being taken into a bar at 4 a.m. in New York once. Sun coming up in New Orleans.
I have no comment, but I'm not going to. Sounds right. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Hey, play hard, work hard, right?
That's right. That's the whole point. This is the whole point of the job. What else? You get in this job so you don't have to grow up. So why? So you don't have to get a real job.
Exactly.
So why would I do that? Why would I do anything else?
Right. Well, let's see. Yahoo Sports national columnist for damn near 20 years. That's amazing. New York Times bestselling author, host of the Yahoo Sports College podcast. A must listen, I must say. I'm a very faithful listener. Great show with Pat Forty. Executive producer of docuseries, a screenwriter, a Basketball Writers Hall of Fame. I mean, what is this? Is this the guy that I know? Oh, yeah, wait a minute. Wanted in 12 states. So, yeah, that's, yeah. So, all joking aside, Dan, I'm really glad that you're with us because in my estimation, you're the best writer going, the columnist that I always make sure to read when there's a big story or even a story that's not on the beaten path. Certainly the most versatile guy. And I'm really glad you're joining us because your career spans the transition really from print to digital media. I've been wondering how have you been able to navigate going from the print world to the digital world so successfully?
Well, I would say that the basics that you learn as a reporter, if you want to call it an old school reporter, where you report out your stories, report out your columns, make calls, journalistically sound, different things like that, are still extremely relevant and always are going to help a column that maybe aren't done as much. I don't know. I don't really know what everyone else does. But then when you get to the internet, it's about topic. And so I think, and I don't know, I'm assuming this, but if you're like a sports columnist in 1973, right, or something like that, or 1980, they throw 500,000 newspapers into driveways, or they get picked up at the subway, and no one knows what got read. No one knows whether covering this made any sense. Nobody knows whether you wrote the right thing. And with the internet, down to the single person. Now there's different placements, and there's a lot of factors, but you have to go that route and at least understand you can't just write anything you want. It has to be the topic. How is your topic how are you differentiating yourself on the same topic and things like that.
Right.
And that's where the reporting and all the other stuff you can do.
Yeah, but there was a pivotal moment you once told me, and that was February 13th, 1994. It's John Chaney and it's John Calipari. It's UMass and it's Temple. It's Sunday afternoon. It's an Atlantic 10 basketball game. And something happened that day that you said, wait a minute, I think I might want to do this.
Well, it's kind of a joke.
What happened that day?
Yeah, John Chaney tried to kill John Calipari. It was pretty awesome. I was there. I will say that didn't make me want to be a sports writer. I always joke that story. But I was like, this is exciting. Like, this is great. If this happens every day, we got something to write about.
Yeah, well, let's set the scene on that one because I really do feel like that's a moment that happened. It went viral the way you could go viral in those days. There was no internet for the most part. There was no social media, but that thing became a huge story. I was covering Atlantic 10 basketball at the Cincinnati Post at the time, and I just remember that thing was like out of control. You're at the game for the Daily Collegian, and UMass wins by a point. And John Calipari comes in. Well, actually, Chaney came in first, right, to have his press conference? Is that right? And then he left, and things seemed normal?
Yeah. So they did the Collegian years later. I can't remember who it. I apologize to whoever did it. They did like an oral history and tried to patch it back together, like forensic science. But as I recall it, I think this is what it was. So Chaney would go right into the press conference and Calipari was going to go second. But Chaney comes in and he compliments the team and it was this great game. And he thought the team UMass is going to be really good. And, it was just a really good game. And he was very, very complimentary. John Chaney is a very interesting guy. I loved him. I got to know him, to a degree later on. He even let the Collegian into one of his practices because he even let me come to one of his practices like 6 a.m.
Yeah, I did that once too. Yeah, it's crazy.
I think he wanted good press in Amherst. I'm not the worst guy in the world, but I loved him. I loved Chaney, but at the time I didn't know him. But he comes in, he compliments UMass, all this stuff, and at the time Calipari's outside, like getting into it with the refs about some call that he thought wasn't fair in the game,
and he won.
He had won the game, right, so Chaney leaves. Cal comes in, and then someone tells Chaney that Calipari was after the refs after the game. If you ever really listen to it, Chaney makes reference to all of this, and he just loses it and comes back in and just starts, it was just phenomenal. It was just great.
What were you thinking when he's yelling, "I'm going to kill you"?
I didn't think there'd be a homicide. But if he had gotten his hands on him, so there were two players, Mike Williams and Derek Kellogg, were there also. And they had a little side table. They were sitting there. And Chaney went up and tried to get at Cal, and the players blocked him. Today, he'd probably be fired because I think he put his hand around one of their necks. It took two college athletes who were like 20 years old and in prime physical condition to hold John Chaney back.
Wow.
And they did. And, but the whole thing goes down and he leaves. And it was just like, what the hell just happened? Like, you couldn't even believe it just happened. And then it was just, we got one of the local TV stations to replay it. We're looking at it out in the hallway on like the camera. You could get the camera to replay it. Like we're looking into the little camera.
Like the Zapruder film, right?
Yeah. And we're like, what the hell? Like what got said? You're in there, you got tapes, but you can't hear everything because Chaney's yelling from the back of the room. And it was a different era of time, so that like there was no breaking in with the news. So until the 6 o'clock news in like Springfield or whoever was at the game, Springfield Mass TV or whatever, there would be no video that would be out there. There was literally like hours of like nothing.
Right.
And then until SportsCenter went crazy with it at like 11 o'clock, nowadays they break into whatever and say, this just happened at, you could be watching whatever was going on. They would have cut to it, but there was none of that. So it was wild. And then they had a return game down in Philly, which was great. But
it was like a week later, right?
It's a couple weeks later. It was awesome. All those A-10 teams were great back then. You had Chaney and Mike Jarvis and Al Skinner and Prosser and Gillen and, just so many good characters in the league. And they were all, and Calipari, he loved it. He got more attention out of it.
Right.
Him and Chaney became friends. Like I said, Chaney just loses his mind every once in a while, but God bless that guy.
Yeah, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite an introduction to college basketball. So you wanted to find out more about college basketball. You liked the sport. You start working for the Basketball Times. You put on that miner's hat, and you go down that mine shaft of college basketball. What did you start to find?
I mean, it's just phenomenal business, especially back then when it was more popular. I mean, the characters of the coaches, the recruiting is the lifeblood of the sport, and there's virtually no rules. Or there are rules, but half the people aren't, if half aren't obeying them. So there's all this like suspicion and cheating and just you name it. It was a great sport. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone knows what college recruiting is, but if you really get intricate with the coaches, they're just dying over this stuff. Like if I don't get this guy, if I get this guy, how'd this recruitment go down? All the different stuff. So, and then they're unique. The campuses are unique. The whole thing was fun. So, and I always gravitated to to kind of the real characters. I was never a believer in this like white hat, black hat thing. I always tried to cover that sport and all sports from the ground up rather than the top down.
Right.
I was also young, so there was no way that I was just going to be like, I wasn't going to become close with like Dean Smith or something. I mean, it just wasn't happening, but I could know all the AAU coaches, or I could know the assistants, or I could know the guys that the media was always bashing. I just saw it, the whole thing. Once you get in to college athletics, and it's the same with football. I mean, when you know the 7-on-7 coaches, or the AAU coaches of the high school or prep schools or all this stuff, you learn real quick that there's not, CBS can paint this guy as the paragon of virtue, and a lot of media will go along with it. But the difference between one guy and the bottom guy is very, very slim.
Right.
And so it's all bullshit. And so I was always willing to kind of, and out of necessity, to write about a lot of the controversial people and all that. And they were just colorful. Right. They were interesting.
Who was one of the first people that you met that you thought to yourself, now this guy's misunderstood?
It's a good question. I don't always know if they're misunderstood. Or maybe misunderstood wouldn't be quite the word, because they might be properly understood. It's just
miscast. How about miscast?
Is a little bit. Maybe the priorities are all wrong. I mean, I became, and still am, very close with Sonny Vaccaro. And if you read stories about Sonny Vaccaro in the 90s or the early 90s or the 80s, there was a generation of sports writer that you would have thought Sonny Vaccaro, the sneaker executive, was Satan, because he was the NCAA didn't like Sonny Vaccaro. He was a threat to their model. Right. And this is where you're getting the coverage top down. You get commissioners would bash guys like him. And
Sonny Vaccaro set the table. He's the guy that signed Michael Jordan to Nike.
Michael Jordan to Nike, signed Kobe Bryant to Adidas.
Right. He was
which might have been even a bigger gamble.
Yeah.
And he was a proponent of everything you see now. And he was also just this, but he was an Italian guy, this didn't fit. He's from Pittsburgh. Who is this guy? And he would always say, stop taking my money if you hate me so much. I mean, he's just and he was always pro athlete. And he'd say, well, why should I'm paying this coach $1 million a year to make a grown man wear a certain sneaker.
Right.
And that kid can't get a ham sandwich.
It's absurd.
Right. Yeah. It was absurd. Everything he said he'd point out. But at the time, there was a massive media effort to protect the NCAA. And so if and the words that would get used to describe sleazy and grime, I mean, they were very, it's like, yeesh. And the more you got to know Sonny and you knew how much he cared about people, and the more stories you heard about, I remember a guy, he got picked second in the draft, and there was a story I remember it was a little after this, but the NBA was expecting this guy to come out, and he didn't come out. And somebody called the kid. This was like one of these street agents, supposedly, pulling kids out of college to go to the pros, God forbid. And he called, he said, "Why are you not putting your name in the draft?" He says, "My coach went through, he said he talked to the NBA. He said I wouldn't be a pick till late in the second round." He said, "Son, you're going top 3." And everybody knows it. So he came out, got picked second, and played in the NBA 15 years or something. But, you start seeing those kind of stories from a different perspective.
Right.
And you go, this guy is freaking lying his ass off on this kid and his family. And anything bad happens, only one good thing can happen here. And it didn't making the Sweet 16 next year for Old State U.
Right.
And, and you start really seeing it all through the thing and the hypocrisy of it all and how crazy it is now. And you got to remember, this stuff was, this was non-negotiable stuff. You can't have a player make money. What were these? They were mad when kids would leave it after their junior year. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You got to show commitment.
Right. It wasn't that long ago.
No.
25 years, maybe.
So, And so, a guy like that, you start to really get to know, and you're like, well, how's he hurting them?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them, the financial planners or the AAU coaches, they're all terrible people, every one of them.
Right.
And, they're horrible. Well, one thing is most of them were from the city. Most of them are African-American. So it's like you can't coach your own kids. They were all terrible. And some of them were. There's no question. Some of them did some things. But I used to say, you take let's say we're into boxing, okay?
Right.
You're down in Columbus, right? So you'd say you start a boxing program in Columbus. And through the years, you send, every other year you get a guy to go pro and he turns out pretty good. And you've developed this thing and taken the youth of Columbus, and you got 100 kids in there boxing. They're staying off the streets. They're learning, whatever they're doing, getting exercise. And every 2 years, one goes on to be successful. And let's say of those guys that get successful, some of them keep you on to be their manager, the corner man. You make some money off of that and all that. The city of Columbus and the state of Ohio would build a freaking statue for you.
Oh, exactly. Right.
In Columbus for helping out the youth of Columbus and being this pillar of the community and launching all these great careers. And because college sports is involved, if you didn't send your kids to Ohio State, you're a scumbag. Because you said, you know what? This kid is going to go to Michigan State, or this kid's going to just go pro, or this kid, maybe it'd be better if he goes and plays. He's kind of got a family life. It's a little dicey, and it's not great for him to stick around. He needs to go out west, right? And none of those things are ever considered by the college fan or all that.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you're a scumbag and you make a little bit of money and you go, well, why is that? It's because we have this whole system set up that there's a rooting interest, where if it was a different sport or you're the piano teacher and all your kids are getting to, becoming concert pianists and all this, you'd be a hero. So what's the difference? And, so a lot of it was learning that perspective on try to look at stories in a different manner.
Yeah, you and Don Yaeger of Sports Illustrated at the time teamed up to write Soul Influence, Basketball, Corporate Greed, and the Corruption of America's Youth. Now we're talking. Do you think you were kind of a bit of an outsider at Basketball Times? Did that help you come at it? Or, because if you're at a traditional media site, perhaps they're not asking you to do something like that. Is that kind of where your interest in the fact that you're coming at it from a different angle fueled some of that, or was it just general curiosity on your part?
A little of both. And again, there are plenty of the AAU system was absolutely out of control in certain ways, and kids were used the wrong way. But it's not all of them, right? Same thing with the colleges or any other system of the world. And Nike and Adidas got a lot better at, I think, handling things after that book. It got a lot more professional, which it needed to be. So now it's it's good because you look at all these kids. They need that. The Nike's EBYL. You still have it's always going to be crazy because there's money on the table. But Yeah, probably. I mean, I was able to explore things. That was really it. I also didn't have a lot I was covering AAU basketball because I thought it was interesting. So Basketball Times let me get into that. I didn't have old school editors that were like, no, that's not a thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I didn't have to cover games. I mean, I used to always say the game's the easiest thing to cover. They got a big scoreboard, middle of the stadium tells you what happened. They'll hand out a stat sheet, quote sheets. They bring in the people. Like, that's easy reporting. It's not really, but I used to think that.
Right.
The hard part is walk into a 1,000-kid AAU tournament and go, what the hell's going on here?
Right.
And figure out the personalities and all that. So I don't know. It was the opportunity to explore things like that, kind of on my own, with my own sensibilities maybe, and my own thoughts on what's a good story, and to learn from it. You know, I went in with the same preconceived notions that I had read, right? So It took a while to where you slowly, and you grow up, you just learn, right? And you hear more stories that you come along and see this is maybe a little bit different. So no matter what I was covering, I was always that kind of like, why is this happening?
Right. I mean, natural storytelling is there's a good guy, there's a bad guy. And that's kind of like you said, from the top down, you know, especially when it comes to college athletics, somebody has to play a role. But when you start digging around, if you're willing to play chess and not checkers, what you find is that contextually, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes here. And things aren't just black and white, they are gray. And I think you're always ahead of the game that way, especially when it came to college basketball and now college football.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when we did too, like the why is there the BCS? Why does the BCS exist? And we dug through that. We did a lot of work on that. And I think we changed a lot of perspectives on what the bowl industry is and where the money's going and different things. But if you just kind of look in a different manner, it was there. So I don't know. I don't know that everything I've done is stands up to the test of time. I don't want to make it seem like, I had this all figured out, but there's certainly more than one side of the story. And just listening to NCAA presidents or commissioners, right. Just isn't it. They manufacture, narrative. They manufacture, and we're doing it right now. Like, right. The sky is falling, right? They have to have a panic to maintain. So everyone's all fired up by like NIL. Oh my God, we're going to have the transfers. It's like, what happened? Nothing happened. Relax. Like, you guys are making this up like you made up every other thing.
Yeah, right.
This crew. But we said 7-on-7 coaches don't have PR guys who set up press conferences.
Right. You have to go find them and talk to them and build their trust.
Right. But if a commissioner of a league wants to sit down and opine, and it's like, well, yeah, it's good for you, but what about the players? You know?
Well, it's not all serious. You also found some funny stuff too, right? I mean, when you think about how wild it was, do you have a favorite recruiting story or something that you always turn to?
Well, I mean,
how did
the
that
best part of covering AAU ball was, first off, the AAU coaches, the prep school coaches, I mean, this regular, they were like me. They're not important people. They're regular people, right? And so we would just have, eventually get to know them, and you just, you're at some AAU tournament. We'd go to the ABCD camp in New Jersey and like sit around the back. There was like a pool at the hotel, and sit around the back of the pool with like a couple cases of beer at night and drink till like 4 a.m. with everybody. Like, that's
research.
My journalism strategy was often just find people who drank a lot and just hang out with them, and then eventually they became like really trusted sources.
Especially if you're buying.
Yes, anybody didn't have to buy; they just wanted the company. So that's probably not something they should teach in journalism school, but it worked for me. So great characters, all of that. I'll tell you my favorite recruiting story. I don't know. It's like about 4 or 5 minutes long. I don't know.
Well, let's go for it. Come on.
Right.
We're not going anywhere.
I wasn't there. This does not involve me, but this is a Jerry
Wait a minute.
No, it was before my time, but it was a Jerry Tarkanian story.
Okay, good. All right, let's hear it.
Okay, Tark's got a number of great ones. So Tark's recruiting this kid from LA named Clifford Lee. He's about 7 feet tall. Everyone's recruiting Clifford Lee. Tark's at UNLV. But then Cliff, I can't remember what the initial charge was, but he gets arrested for something. And he gets put in the juvenile detention center in LA, the El Paso de Robles Juvenile Detention Center. Mm-hmm. So Tark says, almost everyone bails on recruiting Clifford, but Tark's like, he's going to get out. And, I'm not going to, this kid's 7 feet tall. He can run, all this stuff. So I'm going to keep recruiting him. And he's going to get his GED inside the prison and the juvie. And so he goes down to the detention center and they got like the glass up and he's got the phone. And he's, that's the home visit. So you want to come to UNLV? Cliff's like, no one else is recruiting me at this point. Yeah, hell yeah. So Clifford,
just good to see somebody.
Yes, put some money on. Let me get some ho-hos on my books. Gonna get some snacks. Put some money on the book. Anyway, Clifford Lee's gonna go to UNLV, right? So this is a big score for Tark. He's gonna get out this summer, and he's got his GED, all this stuff. So this is a big win. So. UNLV at this time gets a new president of the university. And this is back in the late 70s or something. I don't know. Maybe early 80s. UNLV is a young school at that point. Needless to say, not attracting maybe the best students in America. And so the president comes up with this new strategy that if you are, no matter where you went to high school, you could be in Vegas, you could be in Los Angeles, you could be small town Kansas, whatever high school in America you went to, if you were the valedictorian, you get a free ride to UNLV.
Oh,
Any
sounds
school
good.
in America,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we'll get some smart kids in here. Okay.
Yeah.
So Tark's reading the paper and with the guys in the office, and he says, hey, this is unbelievable. If we get a valedictorian, we can get an extra scholarship. You get them on full academic ride, then you can recruit like a 14th dude, right? It's like a freebie. So they all joke and they're like, Tark, what the hell you think's going on around? We ain't exactly, getting a lot of valedictorians in the UNLV recruiting. Where are we going to find one of these? So Tark goes, well, what about if Clifford Lee was the valedictorian of the GED program at the El Paso de Robles Juvenile Detention Center? So they all laugh. Like, come on, man. Like, they don't have valedictorians of a GED program. So says, well, why not, right? So one of the assistants flies to LA. They find the guy who's who's running the GED program. They get him and they meet with him. And he says, can we make Clifford Lee the valedictorian of the GED program? Guys like, we don't have valedictorians of the GED. It's not even how it works. There's not even he passed the test. There's not even a class. Like what? And the guy is, what about, maybe $500 or something? Oh, yeah, sure. What the hell, guys? The valedictorian. Yeah. I mean, we're not harming anybody, right? So Clifford Lee gets named the valedictorian of the
much to his surprise.
Much to his surprise and everyone else's. So Tark's all excited. He's going to now we can recruit this point guard from Phoenix we like too. We're going to get an extra guy. This is genius, right? This is where Tark really would get in trouble with the NCAA. He'd break rules that didn't exist because no one else thought of the rule, right? Like, he wasn't really cheating.
Right.
It's just like, well, wait a minute. We didn't think we had to write that rule.
All genius is a bit twisted, right?
Right. So he puts in the paperwork. Well, even at UNLV and whenever this was, like the academic people are like, wait a second. Okay, you cannot have a juvenile detention GED program. So they set up a hearing, and Tark is going to go and make the case for Cliff. To get the academic thing. They have a hearing. He's going to think, he's like, I think I got it. I think I'm going to get it. I think I got the votes. He finds out who's on the thing and gets all those people.
Right.
So I said, all right, what happened? He says, weekend before the hearing, at this point, Cliff's out. He says, Cliff boosts a car in LA, gets sent back to prison. The whole thing blows up on us.
I'm Bruce Martin, host of Pit Pass Indy. Each week, I go behind the scenes of the NTT IndyCar Series and introduce our listeners to the biggest stars of IndyCar, which features the Indianapolis 500 as its cornerstone event. The men and women that compete in IndyCar may be the bravest athletes in all of sport, as danger lurks around every corner. they are able to look danger in the eye without flinching. That is why the NTT IndyCar Series features the best racing on the planet. Join me every week as we talk to the stars of IndyCar, including the legends of the Indianapolis 500 on Pit Pass Indy from Evergreen Podcast.
Well, you wrote a great book with Tark, Running Rebel. I highly recommend it if you want some great Tarkanian stories.
300 pages of that.
Oh my! So I wanted to ask you, how did you report? How much time did you spend with Jerry Tarkanian working on that book, and what was a day like?
The book took like 5 days to report, 4 days maybe. So Tark's a great storyteller and very organized, very hardworking guy. He's a son of immigrants.
And what a career. Think about this. 31 seasons, 778 and 202. 19 of those seasons at UNLV where
he was nobody. Right, and he took over like Pasadena. He was coaching JUCO in the 60s, and almost no African Americans could go to college. Even the schools out west, they'd only take one or two guys, and it would have to be a certain kid. He used to recruit. He'd go to like a playground in Watts and grab like three guys and put them on the Pasadena JC and go 33-1. So he always had that credibility. So I waited until he retired. He always wanted to do it. Tark was such a figure you had to write about. I couldn't get in business with him, although I did like him a lot. But I literally was in Vegas. I went to Vegas and sat there. He picked me up like 8 a.m. We drive around in his car, go get breakfast, drive around some more, hang out, and he would just tell story after story after story after story. And after like 4 days, I had probably 90% of the book. Easy book to write. He's a great storyteller, so very colorful guy. And it was just like, I think I got enough.
Yeah, please. I mean, how many more? I mean, we're going to have four books in the series here if you don't set up short.
Yeah, I mean, there was probably some didn't make it. He just had great stories. He's a great storyteller. He's a colorful guy. I mean, he was awesome.
But he was a guy that really, he was like vilified, and he's kind of what we were talking about, black hats and white hats. He was the guy that was the black hat, suing the NCAA, fighting the NCAA. But there were other guys like that too, I think. And those were the guys that always made it fun if you're willing to go there with them, right? You just had to be able to ride with the so-called black hats.
They're a ton of fun. And their stories are, that one's insane. But he would... look, he would talk about like rungs on the ladder and stuff. He'd say we get dumped on because my guy's didn't graduate and now he's like working as a pit boss at the casino or something like that, or floor boss and like that. But he goes, you got to look like I wasn't, that kid's home life and where he came from. He climbed more rungs on the ladder. And then, I'm not getting Grant Hill and Shane Battier out here, So it's like, Grant Hill was going to be really successful if basketball never existed. And nothing against Grant Hill. It's not his fault or it's not Duke's fault. But, it's sort of like everyone gives us crap, but look what we did do for him. And, some of that was disingenuous. He mainly wanted to win. I'm always like, you guys are always trying to help out the underprivileged when they're 6'6". No 5'6" guys in the high school,
right?
I guess no one who's no 5'7" slow kid needs any help. Oh, okay. I mean, they're full of crap too, but it's just a different. Right. I'm here to mold men. Well, there's a lot of ways to do that other than being a college basketball coach.
Right.
One problem with college sports is they got up the athletes. It's like, or not the athletes, that's the Red Smith line, right? Don't got up the athletes. They got up the coaches. So your college coach is not just a good winner, but he's practically infallible,
Yeah, they have to have they're encased in values.
Right.
That was always
and I don't believe anyone sits there, if you're a New England Patriot fan, do you really think Bill Belichick's the greatest human on the face of the earth? Or you just think he's a hell of a damn coach, and I'm glad we got him. These guys they're regular people. And they're trying to win. Yeah. And I get it. You have to portray yourself that way. It doesn't hurt. But if you're really that into helping people, you probably find a different route than just helping, 12 really tall guys.
Yeah. It always amused me the different narratives that surrounded what ultimately was coming down to wins and losses, right? And you just see that so much in colleges where you don't see it in the pros. The pros, it's mercenary. It's pros.
Yeah, or you're like Doc Rivers is a hell of a guy, you know? Monty Williams is a hell of a guy, but he had out-coached on a game. You know, like, I mean, there's a lot of great people in pro basketball. They act like they don't do this in pro basketball, too. Like, you can't have your only good relationships with your college coach. Like, really? If you say you spend you spend 2 years with one college coach, you spend 6 with Doc Rivers, you don't think he'd pick up anything?
Yeah, you don't think Tim Duncan and Popovich had a pretty good, relationship and learned from each other over the years just because they weren't in college together? So it's funny. So you had all these different experiences in college sports covering it. And then in 2003, Yahoo Sports hires you as national columnist. And did you, when you think about your days, like you said, covering news as an intern in Chicago and Indianapolis, and then going into the belly of the beast and getting away from just the scoreboard, how did that type of mindset inform the type of columnist you became at Yahoo?
Well, at first it was like, we just need to get this going. I was the first sports writer, really the first journalist they ever hired at Yahoo. I mean, we had some editors, the editor that hired me. So we had to try to get the thing going because we were a search engine then. We were a tech company. We were not a content. There was no one ever, the word content didn't exist.
Yeah.
No one was like, oh, you're a content provider. So it was a battle to build that business up. And it was like working for a startup that happened to be worth like $50 billion at the time. So it was great. But our division could get cut at any moment because it was just a total flyer. So it was a lot of work of just trying to get readers who would come back, make an impact, build credibility with the leagues. It was probably a 4 or 5 year period of just a lot of growing that way. But same thing, you couldn't cover everything. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, you had to either try to cover the big events, obviously, but you also had to try to do stuff that could make an impact away from the scoreboard. I mean, there was many years I was the only guy,
right?
Only person,
right? So
you just legitimately can't cover. You just can only cover so much. So how do you do it? And that was kind of the challenge there. But part of that was like, how are we going to make this site matter? How are we going to have a brand? What are we going to do? And it was a process, a lot of learning, a lot of figuring it out. How's the internet work? I mean, it was brand new. Internet content was just brand new. Right. We weren't writing it wasn't also on a newspaper. This was it. So learned a lot of lessons back then and figured a lot of stuff out. We do a ton of brainstorming and, really looking at the data and how things work, the way emotions play into the internet. The internet's a very different way of it's a different beast. We used to talk about, when you read a newspaper or a magazine at the time, you leaned back in your chair and you read it. And when you are on the internet, you're leaning forward into your computer. That's interesting. That little bit is a different element. You're not, whether it's more aggressive or more emotional or more connected to what you're reading, it's there. There was a million things we started. We did live blogs very, very early, if not, one of the first to ever do it. Different type of trips. Space didn't matter. There's just so many different things that we learned. And it's pretty funny because you still get people who come in and they still don't, like that was 15 years ago, and you'll hear people talk about stuff. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't work. I'll hear about this. Oh, they're going to do this. Well, that ain't going to work. We tried that in 2005. That didn't pan out.
Well, I think what you guys did and what you particularly did was you just, the bedrock was always journalism. It was always willing to get your hands dirty, do the shoe leather reporting. And so when I think about some of the work that you've done, a lot of it has involved scandals, whether it's the NCAA in Miami,
Connecticut. Number one sport in America is controversy.
Right. And you think about the sports and how much money's involved, and I always felt like that was just underplayed in general. And yet you were willing to go into that type of world, again, with your miner's hat on, and let's go down and see what we can find. What was it like working on some of those big scandal stories that you and the great Charles Robinson and some others were able to work on together?
Well, when it came to college athletics, we were very into like exposing the whole system. And whether that was showing a perspective of how, again, from the bottom up, what players and athletes, if parents think, all that. Like, the big thing in college football right now is the transfer portal, right? It's horrible. Absolutely terrible chaos. Have you heard one player or his family complain?
No. Yeah.
0 complaints from the parents. Not one parent thinks, please, could you please give us less rights? Please stop us from making money. We don't want it. Like, there's 0 complaints. But you would think, because the coaches are all screaming and the ADs are screaming, that this is the worst thing that's ever befallen. And yet, one side is perfectly great. They're like, this is great. Right. So, like, it's part of that. It's showing how corrupt, like, the college football play, the BCS was. How much money they were just letting these bowl games steal from them. And happily doing it because they were getting a kickback through a bowl bonus or something like that. And it was showing that the NCAA's enforcement system is complete crap and there are no white hats and black hats. So we sat there and said, you know what, we're going to investigate everybody. Mm-hmm. There's nothing sacred. I don't have a favorite team. I went to UMass. Our football team's the worst team in the whole country. And the basketball, I mean, it's irrelevant athletic program, right? Don't care. We will go after any sacred cow. We don't care. Everyone says, no one will investigate them. We will. And as you built that up, and so it wasn't really about, did we catch this school doing this or that? And we shied away from you can always find some this point guard at at a kind of high mid-major took a little $1,000 on the side. Like, you can always bust those guys. That's easy. It's Can you catch the coach orchestrating it? Can you catch the school orchestrating it? Like, there was one where, like, this guy, Will Lyles, who's run a 7-on-7 program, he had in Texas, he kind of had this, bogus scouting service. They were paying, you had to buy a scouting service, and Willie would help you kind of recruit. And Will Lyles is a great guy. Will Lyles does a ton of stuff for the kids in Houston. And part of it is that, the scandal came out. First, we do the scandal and or it starts breaking, and everyone's like, Will Lyles is a scumbag. Actually, Will Lyles is a good guy. He spent a lot of time with these players. But, the University of Oregon paid him with a university check, right? This is so we just went after it. Anyway, they were intense. They were kind of fun. But it wasn't the way people sometimes, a lot of people got it, but it wasn't anything about let's bust Miami for cheating. It's dude, they had a $1 billion Ponzi schemer, literally recruiting players for, everybody knew.
Right.
So don't sit there and tell me when you go, oh my God, we're shocked, or players can't get paid money. No, this is what was happening. You know it as well as everyone. Everybody knows what's going on.
Right.
Admit it. And once you admit it, and once you start losing that cloak that the media often provided, that there were white hats and black hats, and this guy's a scumbag and this guy isn't, it starts becoming harder to justify keeping all the money for yourself.
And then something becomes so big that it can't be ignored by anybody, and that's something like the Jerry Sandusky controversy at Penn State, that scandal. Larry Nassar, you were there writing that every day in the courtroom. And then outside of the college realm, you're covering something like Aaron Hernandez. And the idea that you are willing to go into the courtroom day after day after day, you just don't see a lot of that in sports media. And for a guy like Hernandez, you were there every day pretty much, right? At the trials?
2 trials, yeah, a lot of it. Yeah, right. I mean, I'd work with the lawyers and be like, they clue you in when somebody look, can you text me if we're getting a good guy tomorrow morning? I can fly in, but I can't be sitting here for 3 days doing cell phone. Like when they're doing we need to use the cell phone. You ever watch Dateline? Like, cell phone technology shows the guy was in the neighborhood. That takes like days to go through. Like, it's the boringest. Right. And then this tower pinged for 14 seconds. And then this tower, it's like, the worst. I'm like, I can't be here for that. But if you're going to have, we're bringing in this guy. So, yeah, I was there for a great deal of it.
So on that day in April of 2015, when the jury convicted Hernandez, the former New England tight end, the New England Patriots, of murder of Odin Lloyd, what was it like in that courtroom?
That was I will say the most dramatic things I've ever been involved with are verdicts at murder trials. I've covered a few murder trials, and when they bring the jury in, foreman reads the thing, like, it is, I mean, it's incredible, right? You have unbelievable anguish and emotion in the room. Someone's been murdered. Mm-hmm. You have a family desperate for a yes or guilty. You have another family desperate for a not guilty. Sometimes it's closer than you think. There's so much pain because you can sit there and say, this guy's a murderer. I hope he goes away for life, and that's fine. He should, but he still has a mother or a brother or a friend. It's like it's painful. It's unbelievably painful for them. And then you have the victims' families that just unbelievably. So the drama of that moment and the pain in those courtrooms is always just almost unbelievable. Even if you have no connection. And generally you've sat through so much, you've gotten to know these people. One thing about covering a trial is very few people go to them. Mm-hmm. So if you're there for a week or let alone weeks, they have we're going to take a 20-minute recess. Everyone steps outside. Like, there's no one to talk to except the other people. So you tend to get to meet everybody, at least in some manner.
Right.
Not everyone wants to talk or whatever, but it's just small talk, right? Well, you see the game last night, or, it was snowing on the way in. Did you make it all right? So you kind of have these connections with a lot of different people. And, so that was amazing. I remember the woman who delivered that one. She was very small. She was, I don't know. She's in the jury box, but maybe 5 feet tall. I'm going to guess 40. I think she was like an operations manager at, some manufacturing company, right? Anonymous, but this incredibly well organized. And you see the jury, but they never speak. So you try to figure out who the jurors are. And this is the last thing I thought this woman would like. I was like, wow, they voted her the foreman. Interesting, right? The foreperson. And she stood up there and delivered that guilty. And it was amazing because they made them immediately sit down if you're watching the video, because you're innocent till proven guilty. But once you're guilty, have a seat. They lock you up. Mm-hmm. Like, you're no longer, because in the courtroom he's supposed to be, he's in a suit. He's allowed to walk around, all that. He's innocent. But granted, there's a lot of cards. It was amazing drama, and that woman. I always thought I was the first person to ever really hold Aaron Hernandez accountable for his actions in his life. He'd always been able to skate by on everything he ever did, either through his personality, his intelligence, or his football gifts. And then here was this woman just saying, "You're out," flattened him.
Wow.
And then the wailing of crying from both sides. It's just awful. Those things are just awful.
Right.
Nassar was the worst, though. Nassar was the worst courtroom I've ever been in. He was guilty. He had pled to the plea deal, pled guilty, 10 counts, and he already was going in for child porn. So he spared the trial, but then they brought in, these. They're like, well, we're going to do this. The district court, the little district court in Lansing. They had this Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, incredible woman. And so she says, what we're going to do is any victim who wants to speak at the sentencing can speak. And if it takes weeks, we're going to do weeks. Anybody can show up. They can talk for as long as they want. They can talk for as little as they want. So he had so many victims, and these women
all these former gymnasts,
many gymnasts or athletes of some sort, one after another. These young women now who were girls, and honestly, at least 3, 4, 5 times a day, you just choke up and want to cry, if not cry. I mean, the stories were horrible. And you're like, I think in the end there were 170, but at one point there were going to be 88. And then they started inspiring the others. Everyone remembers Allie Raceman. She wasn't even going to do it. Mm-hmm. But the stories we were writing out of the thing and the video that was coming out inspired the others to start coming forward. So they had 88. They ended up with like 170 or something. And every one of them deserved their own column. Mm. Right? But there's like 20 a day. And you're like, I can't write. I mean, just can't do it. But the stories were so awful. That was the worst. But then there was like this empowering part to it. Mm-hmm. And this release almost that in some ways was better than, I don't know, a crazy scene. Crazy.
You're also in there as a father. You have your own kids. Yeah. So what was the worst moment for you sitting there watching that?
Well, I was talking to this one woman and her daughter. This was after, and the girl was had hurt her hip, and I don't even know if it was gymnastics, but whatever it was, the hip, and she was from the Detroit area, and the girl was 11, and she got a recommendation, and they said, "Hey, I can get you in with Larry Nassar up in Lansing. He's the Olympic gymnastics doctor."
Right.
So like a good parent, wow, that's incredible. This would be right. I mean, who wouldn't take that? Okay. We got literally the best of the best. Like, that's crazy. And she drove her up, and Nassar rapes her right in front of the woman. She doesn't even know what's going on. He's so, like, they're all in the room. But she said to me, the girl was she goes, well, I go, how old was she at the time? He says, well, I think she was 11 or something. And she goes, she still sat in the back seat. And I remember thinking as a parent, just like, oh my God, like she's not old enough to sit in the front seat.
Wow.
And I think I just started like, the emotion, she was fine, but it was like, it's very rare when you're the one trying to keep it together, right, in an interview. Mm-hmm. But you're just like, oh my God. Like, the girl was sitting there, girl's done. There was a long stretch where she had, they didn't know what was wrong. Suicide, like they couldn't leave her alone, all knives out of the house, all drugs locked up, all medication locked up, literally tortured their life for 6 years. Before she finally admitted what had gone down, right, and turned this whole family's life on. Now she's was heading off to. She came. She was heading off to Boston College. I don't want to reveal too much, but I guess she did the interview. I don't remember, but she was doing much better. But that whole scene, and then imagine like your whole family's the whole entire family suffered. Mm-hmm. Because they all had to spend their time trying, like, why is my 12-year-old trying to kill herself? And no one could figure it out. So, awful stuff. Anyway, it's an uplifting. But
I think it's very important because I think what it shows, again, is we think of sports as just, it's entertainment. And it is. But it also reflects life. And if you're really going to be the type of columnist that you are, what sets you apart is that you're willing to go there. You're willing to go there in person. You're willing to go there, work sources, develop relationships, do the shoe leather reporting that I don't care if it was back in the print days or if it's now in the digital era. You got to go there. You got to do the reporting, and you got to put some type of perspective into this that others aren't willing to do. And I think that's what sets you apart, Dan.
Or they're not allowed, right? I mean, I don't know. But one thing about that kind of a story, I remember I did a long podcast with Jim Rome. I did a number of Jim Rome, a lot of radio off of Nassar, which was good because like you're reaching the audience. And I used to say this line. I'm like, look, when you get together with your friends, and if you're a dad, you don't sit around and go, hey, hear about that child molestation. Like, it's not really a discussion that comes up when you're having beers at watching Monday Night Football. So but as every dad and every parent wants to protect their kids. So to bring those kind of conversations into an audience that isn't normally going to hear it, is particularly huge, because you just don't know. I mean, every parent, it's just one little thing. Like, you know what? I'm gonna keep an eye on my kid today a little bit more. You got to have you got to have bosses committed to it. And one thing about trials, they usually pay off, and it's incredible readership. But there are days when, nothing happens, and you got to kind of find a story. But so we've always done that. But we've always gotten, true crime is obviously a huge thing. So we've always gotten terrific readership on that. And but like Hernandez was weird. Like there was very few. The coverage was not enormous, especially the second one. And it was kind of wild that, and yeah, you don't get many sports writers there, but I think that sports editors just not, I don't know. I mean, to think that there wasn't interest in Aaron Hernandez, it's crazy.
But I think what it is also a reflection of, again, it's sports, it's games, it's wins and losses. But no, it's so much more than that,
Or your sports writer can't handle it, but maybe they can.
Right.
We'll just have the court reporter handle it, or we won't bother with it. That guy's gone, and it's like, no, this is, trust the sports writer. They're good at telling stories. I mean, there's so many talented sports writers who go to a game and turn a 3-2 baseball game or a 6-1 baseball game into something worth readable. Give them a chance.
Well, I'm certainly glad you're still doing it for us, and you do it as well as anybody for Yahoo Sports. And I know you got a lot of sources to work and phone calls to make, and you're busy. You've been very gracious with your time. But the bar owner has turned up the lights, and I think I'm going to have to buy the last round.
Not the first time.
And so until we meet again, Mr. Wetzel, I want to thank you a lot for joining us on Press Box Access.
Appreciate it, Todd. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
I'm Bruce Martin, host of Pit Pass Indy. Each week, I go behind the scenes of the NTT IndyCar Series and introduce our listeners to the biggest stars of IndyCar, which features the Indianapolis 500 as its cornerstone event. The men and women that compete in IndyCar may be the bravest athletes in all of sport, as danger lurks around every corner. They are able to look danger in the eye without flinching. That is why the NTT IndyCar Series features the best racing on the planet. Join me every week as we talk to the stars of IndyCar, including the legends of the Indianapolis 500 on Pit Pass Indy from Evergreen Podcast.